The rain hit the tin roof like falling stones. Each drop echoed through the tiny one-room house in Chennai, where a young boy named Sundar sat cross-legged on the cold cement floor. His notebook was damp. The power had gone out again, and the only light came from a flickering candle placed on an old steel plate. His hands trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from the weight of dreams far too large for the small space he called home. Lakshmi Pichai. His mother watched him quietly from across the room. She had just finished folding clothes she washed by hand for the neighbors. Her fingers were rough, her back ached, and her stomach was empty. But her eyes were filled with something strong, something unshakable. "You're not sleeping yet?" she asked softly, trying not to disturb the little silence they had. "I want to finish this chapter, Uma. It's about silicon chips and how they store memory," Sundar replied without lifting his eyes. She didn't understand what a silicon chip was, but she understood her son's voice, gentle, focused, hungry for more than food. He didn't complain about the heat, or the mosquitoes, or the candlelight. He just studied, quietly, like he was building a bridge to somewhere far away. Earlier that day, Lakshmi had walked 5 kilometers to find cheaper rice. The shopkeeper looked at her torn sari and asked if she had money. She opened her palm and showed the few coins she earned cleaning floors. He laughed but gave her half a bag. She didn't argue. Her pride had vanished long ago, but as she carried the rice home, her feet bleeding slightly, her mind whispered just one thought: "My son will not live like this forever." There was no bed in their home. Sundar slept beside her on the floor. Sometimes rats ran along the walls at night, but he never woke up. He was used to the sound. What he wasn't used to was missing school. Once, he got a high fever, and Lakshmi told him to rest. Instead, he sneaked out, walked 2 miles to school, and sat on the front bench like nothing had happened. When Lakshmi found out, she scolded him, but secretly, her heart swelled with pride. They had only one fan, and it barely worked. In summer, the room turned into an oven. Sometimes, Lakshmi fanned him with an old newspaper while he studied. She stayed up late, watching his shadow move across the wall as he wrote equations, memorized English words, and dreamed of computers he had never seen. One night, Sundar looked up and said, "Amma, one day, I will work with the smartest people in the world. I will go to America. I will build things that people use every day." Lakshmi didn't laugh. She didn't say, "That's impossible." Instead, she walked to him, placed her hand on his head, and said, "Then I will make sure nothing stops you." It wasn't a loud promise. It wasn't grand, but it was unbreakable. Their neighbors laughed at them. Some said, "He's just a skinny boy with no connections. Let him dream, but don't hope too much." Others whispered behind Lakshmi's back, "She acts like he's a prince." Lakshmi never answered them. She just smiled when they mocked. Sundar, she made extra food for them the next day. Kindness was her weapon. Silence was her armor. The days grew hotter. The rain became heavier. But Sundar's routine never changed. School in the morning, homework in the afternoon, and dreams at night. When he ran out of notebooks, Lakshmi tore pages from old calendars and stitched them together. When he needed a school uniform, she worked overtime, ironing clothes, until her palms burned. One evening, their school announced a science competition. The winner would get a scholarship. Sundar came home with excitement shining in his eyes. "Amma, I want to join, but we need a circuit board. It costs too much." Lakshmi didn't hesitate. The next morning, she went to the goldsmith's shop and sold her only bangle, the last thing her mother gave her before marriage. When Sundar saw the circuit board on the table that evening, he looked at her in disbelief. "Amma, how did you?" "Don't ask. Just win," she said, handing him a glass of water. He did win. He came first. His name was announced at school assembly, and for the first time, his classmates clapped, not out of politeness, but respect. The principal called him a boy with A mind made for greatness. That night, Lakshmi lit an extra candle. Not because they had power, but because she wanted their little home to look like it was celebrating. She cooked a small feast with the little she had driced dal and a sweet maid from Jaggery. They ate together, and for a moment, it felt like the world had finally noticed the quiet fire burning inside her son. But the road ahead was still long, and the world was still cruel. The next week Sundar fell ill. A virus spread through the slum. The doctor said it was serious, and treatment would cost more than they had ever seen. Lakshmi went door to door, asking for help. Most people shut their doors. One neighbor gave her a few rupees. Another told her, "You should have saved the money you spent on that science thing." She sat outside the clinic, holding Sundar's feverish hand, whispering prayers she barely remembered. Then, a stranger sat beside her. He was a retired teacher who had once taught her husband. "I heard about your boy," he said. "I want to help." He paid for the medicine, and Sundar recovered slowly. When Lakshmi asked why he helped, the man said, "Because I've never seen a mother fight this hard for a child's future. And that child, he's not ordinary." As Sundar regained his strength, Lakshmi's belief grew stronger, not in miracles, but in resilience. Every setback was another lesson. Every small victory was another step forward. Years passed. Sundar got into a good college. He had to walk long distances and sometimes skipped meals, but he never gave up. Lakshmi took up more houses to clean. Her fingers cracked, her eyes weakened, but her spirit never did. Then, one day, a letter arrived. It was from Stanford University. Sundar had been accepted. He read it aloud, his hands shaking. Lakshmi listened, her heart thudding like a drum. "Amma, they want me. They believe in me." Lakshmi smiled, tears falling from her tired eyes. "I always did." But getting into Stanford was just the beginning. He still needed money for travel, for fees, for life in a land where even water costs more than they made in a week. The next part of their journey would test everything, everything they had sacrificed, everything they believed in, and Lakshmi was ready. Because a mother who had walked miles for rice, washed floors for books, and sold her memories for her son's dreams, was never going to stop now. The morning the letter from Stanford arrived, the sky was clear. But Lakshmi Pichai's heart was storming. The white envelope sat on the old wooden table like a challenge from the universe. Sundar had read it 3 times already, and each time, his voice trembled more than the last. "Amma, they want me. But the fees, ... It's too much. I don't think." "No," Lakshmi interrupted gently, placing her hand on his arm. "Don't ever say that again. If they want you, we will find a way. Even if I have to walk across the country, you will go." But in her heart, fear had already begun to crawl. How could she, a woman with no savings, no property, no jewelry left, send her son halfway across the world? The ticket alone cost more than what she earned in a whole year. They had no one to turn to. Sundar's father had passed away when he was still in school. Uncles and aunts had long cut ties. And their neighborhood, while filled with familiar faces, was not the kind of place where people had extra money lying around. That night, after Sundar fell asleep with the acceptance letter tucked under his pillow, Lakshmi sat on the edge of the small veranda. She stared up at the stars. She whispered, "If there is any God listening, please help me help him fly." The next morning, she went to the local bank. She wore her cleanest sari and held a folder with Sundar's certificates. The manager, a kind but cautious man, looked at the documents. "Your son is brilliant, no doubt," he said. "But this is America, madam. You need collateral, some property, jewelry." Lakshmi shook her head. "Anything at all?" he asked, softer this time. She hesitated, then pulled out a torn photo of her husband. This was his dream. Maybe that's worth something. The man looked at her for a long time, then stood up and said, "Come with me." He introduced her to a social worker who worked with student foundations. They filled out forms, made copies of documents, and promised to try. Weeks passed with no reply. Sundar kept studying, but his smile faded. He spoke less. He started helping Lakshmi with housework again, quietly putting aside his dreams. One evening, he came to her with folded papers. "Amma, maybe I should study here instead. I can work part-time. I'll still do something good." Lakshmi didn't say anything. Instead, she opened the cupboard and pulled out a small tin box. Inside were notes and coins, everything she had saved in secret. Birthday money, money from extra jobs. Even small coins she'd found on the road. She pushed it into his hands. "This is all I have, and if it gets you one step closer, then that's enough." Sundar stared at her, tears in his eyes. "Amma, this won't even pay for the visa fee." "Then we'll collect more," she said. "You will not stop now." In the days that followed, Lakshmi visited every house she ever worked in. Some people gave her old clothes, some gave small donations. One elderly woman, whose windows Lakshmi cleaned every week, gave her a gold ring. "You once wiped my tears when my husband died," she said. "Let me do something for your boy." Still, the amount was not enough. Then, something unexpected happened. That a newspaper reporter came to Sundar's college. He had heard about the boy from the slum who got into Stanford. The next morning, Sundar's face was on the front page with the headline, "From Chennai to Silicon Valley if he can get there." People started talking. Students started collecting. Teachers pooled money. Even strangers sent small donations. But one man did something different. His name was Natarajan. He owned a small electronics shop near the market. He saw Sundar's photo in the paper and recognized him. "He's the boy who used to come to my shop and ask me about motherboards," he told his wife. "He never bought anything, just asked questions." He visited their home that same evening. "I don't have much, but I've seen fire in his eyes," he said. "If he needs help, I'm in." He gave them 10,000 rupees and introduced them to someone who knew someone at an education trust. Slowly, the impossible began to shift. People started believing, because Lakshmi believed first. Finally, 1 week before the visa deadline, a letter arrived. It was from a non-profit organization based in Delhi. They had read about Sundar. They would sponsor his flight and give partial support for his first semester. He could go. He could finally go. But even in that moment of joy, Lakshmi felt a deep ache. She would have to let him leave. Her world, her little boy, was going to a place so far that even phone calls were rare. On the night before his flight, Sundar sat beside her, double quotes, "A-M-M-I. I'm scared," he whispered. Lakshmi smiled and handed him a small cloth bag. Inside was a photo of their family, a packet of turmeric, and a folded piece of her old sari. "This is your home," she said. "Take it with you, and remember, no matter where you go, your Oma is always with you." At the airport, Lakshmi didn't cry. She held back every tear until he was gone, until the plane vanished into the sky. Only then did she sit on the bench, her hands still holding the air where he last stood. Sundar's journey had begun, and Lakshmi's battle wasn't over. The first time Sundar stepped off the plane in America, he felt two things at once, excitement and fear. The air was sharp and cold, unlike anything he had known in Chennai. People walked fast, talked less, and smiled even less. Everything was bigger, louder, and unfamiliar. He held his small bag tightly, filled only with 2 shirts, 1 sweater, and a little cloth pouch his Uma gave him. He had less money than the average student, but more hope than most people could carry. On his first night at Stanford, Sundar sat alone in his shared room. His roommate was friendly but came from a rich family. Sundar's blanket was too thin for the cold. He curled up near the heater and opened the folded piece of his mother's sari. He closed his eyes and breathed in the faint smell of home. That night, he cried silently, missing his mother, his language, even the familiar noise of the streets back home. The next morning, he wore his only warm sweater and walked into a classroom full of sharp minds and confident voices. Some students discussed ideas like they were born speaking the language of computers. Sundar listened carefully, writing fast, watching everything. He didn't speak much, but his eyes were open, and his mind never stopped working. The days passed, like wind, classes, labs, libraries, part-time jobs. Sundar cleaned tables in the cafeteria before sunrise and typed code until midnight. His fingers hurt, his back ached, but he smiled whenever he saw his mother's photo in the corner of his notebook. Every Sunday, he wrote letters to Lakshmi. He told her about everything, the snow, the food, the buildings, the people, but he never mentioned how lonely he felt, or how many meals he skipped, or how some nights he had to choose between buying a textbook or eating dinner. Lakshmi, back in Chennai, waited for his letters like they were drops of rain in a dry season. She read them aloud to the neighbors, even the ones who once laughed at her. And when she read about Sundar's progress, her chest filled with quiet pride. But then came a silence. 1 week passed, then 2. No letter, no call. Lakshmi couldn't sleep. She walked to the small internet cafe, asking the boy at the counter to help her send an email. She didn't know how to type, but the boy wrote as she spoke. Dear Sundar, are you well? Did something happen? Please reply. I am waiting. Sundar received the email late at night after leaving his part-time job. He read it, sitting under a library staircase, tears rolling down his cheeks. He replied quickly, Amma, I'm sorry. I didn't want to worry you. I had a tough exam. I'm doing fine. I miss you every day. But the truth was, Sundar had fainted in the lab the week before. He had been skipping meals, drinking only water and coffee to stay awake, trying to finish a tough project. The professors pushed hard, and he wanted to prove he belonged. A kind professor named Dr. Grant had found him unconscious and helped him up. Son, you need to take care of yourself, Dr. Grant said. I will, Sundar replied, embarrassed. Where? Are you from India? Chennai. Do you have support here? Just my mother back home. She believes in me more than I believe in myself. Dr. Grant looked at him for a long moment, then placed a warm hand on his shoulder. Sometimes, belief is the only fuel we have. Don't waste it. After that, Dr. Grant gave Sundar small research tasks that paid a little extra. It wasn't much, but it helped him buy proper food and save a little. Lakshmi continued her work in India, her body growing weaker, but her voice always strong. She often whispered to herself, my son is in America. He is learning things the world has never seen. One day, Sundar called home. Lakshmi picked up after the first ring. Amma, he said, trying not to cry. Yes, Kana, I'm here. I made my first invention today. What is it? A software model for improving data management. My professor said it's genius. Lakshmi didn't understand the words, but she understood his happiness, and that was enough. But the path was far from smooth. During the holidays, Sundar stayed on campus while others went home. He couldn't afford to travel. One winter, a snowstorm knocked out power, and he spent the night in the library, wrapped in his jacket, eating crackers. The next day, he wrote a letter to Lakshmi. Oma, today, I learned something. Even in the coldest place, if your heart is warm with purpose, you can survive anything. Lakshmi read the letter aloud to herself, then folded it carefully and placed it in a tin box. That same winter, back in Chennai, Lakshmi fell sick. She didn't tell Sundar. She didn't want to worry him. She still cleaned houses, now moving slower, her cough growing worse, but her strength came from a single sentence she repeated every morning. My son is doing what no one believed he could. I must keep going. Then, one morning, She collapsed while sweeping a porch. The neighbor rushed her to the hospital. The doctors said she needed rest, better food, and regular care. But she had none of that. When Sundar finally heard about it, from a friend in the neighborhood, he froze. He wanted to leave everything and fly back. But Lakshmi, now recovering slowly, sent him a message through a neighbor. "Tell my son, if he comes back now, I'll never forgive him. He must finish what he started." That message broke Sundar's heart, and it rebuilt him stronger. He worked harder. He studied deeper. And when he finally stood on the stage for his graduation, wearing the black robe and holding the certificate with his name on it, he looked up at the ceiling, as if looking through it across oceans, across miles to a small house in where his mother stood by a window, smiling. "This is for you, Amma," he whispered. But he wasn't done yet. There were bigger things waiting, and he was ready to face them. After graduating from Stanford, Sundar stood at a crossroads. The paper in his hand said, Master of Science, but the real world didn't care much for titles. It cared for connections, confidence, and capital all. The things Sundar had never truly known. He started applying for jobs. Tech firms, startups, big companies, any place that needed a mind like his. He poured his heart into each resume, each cover letter. He knew his ideas were strong, his work was solid, but week after week, the rejections came. "We regret to inform you, ... Double quote, thank you for your application, ... We have selected other candidates, ... Double quotes. Each rejection felt like a small slap. Each one reminded him that he was still just a boy from a poor neighborhood in trying to make space in a world built for those with privilege. He called Lakshmi one night, his voice quiet. "Amma, maybe I should come back." There was silence on the other end. Then she said, "Do you want to come back because you've failed, or because you're tired?" "I'm tired," he admitted. "Then rest, but never return just because you're tired. Return only when your work here is done." Those words stayed with him. He took a short-term job at a small startup. The pay was low, the hours long, but the experience was gold. He learned how teams worked, how to listen to users, how to build with purpose. At night, he continued writing code. Sometimes on paper, sometimes on borrowed computers. He had an idea. Something small, but powerful. A browser tool that could make searching faster, easier. But who would listen to him? Then, one rainy afternoon, he got a call. A professor he once assisted had passed his name to someone at Google. They were looking for product thinkers. "Can you come in for an interview?" the voice asked. "Yes," Sundar said, standing up so quickly his chair fell over. He wore his cleanest shirt, polished his shoes until they shone, walked into the Google office with his mother's words echoing in his mind. "Walk like you belong, because you do." The interview began. They asked questions, tough ones, strange ones, not just about code, but about thought, about how he would solve problems, what mattered most to him. At one point, a senior executive asked, "If you could change one thing in how we use the internet, what would it be?" Sundar paused. Then he said, "I would make the browser more intelligent. The gateway to the web should think with the user, not just for them." The room went silent for a moment. Then someone nodded. He walked out unsure. The waiting began again. Days passed. His heartbeat followed every email notification like a drum. Then came the message. He was hired, not just as an employee, but as a product manager, one of the youngest on the team. He called Lakshmi that night. She answered on the first. "Ring Amma," he whispered. "Yes, Kana. I got the job." There was silence. Then she laughed. Not a loud laugh, a soft, tear-filled laugh that sounded like sunlight after years of storm. "I told you," she said. "Your seat is not in the back. It's at the table." Sundar began work at Google with quiet passion. He didn't walk in like a star. He walked in like a student. He listened, he watched, and then, slowly, he built. He joined the team for a product no one believed in. It was called Google Toolbar. Most thought it was unnecessary. But Sundar saw the future. He worked day and night, improving the code, simplifying the design, listening to feedback, learning every detail. Soon, the toolbar became more than just a tool. It became a habit for millions. Then, a bigger opportunity came. A team was forming to redesign the browser experience. Sundar raised his hand. "I want to help," he said. Many doubted him. Some said, "He's too quiet." Others said, "He's not aggressive enough." But a few saw the fire. He got the chance. He worked quietly, patiently, building the foundations for something new. And then, after months of effort, Google Chrome was born. It launched slowly. Many expected it to fail, but it did. Single quotes. Users loved it because it was fast, simple, and made for real people. In just a few years, Chrome became the most used browser in the world, and the boy who once borrowed computers became the man leading a revolution in how the world connected. Back in Chennai, Lakshmi didn't understand Chrome. She still used an old keypad phone, but she saw her son on TV, read about him in papers, and neighbors began calling her Sundar's Oma. She never corrected them, but in her heart, she whispered, "He is not just mine. He belongs to every mother who ever gave up everything for her child." But even as success arrived, Sundar remained grounded. He sent money home, but more than that, he sent love. He called every Sunday. He asked about her health, her meals, her neighbors, and Lakshmi, now older, always said the same thing: "I'm fine, Kana. Just promise me you're eating well." One day Sundar visited home after years. He walked into the same tiny house, with the same tin roof. Everything had changed in his life, but this house still smelled like turmeric, soap, and warm rice. He hugged Lakshmi tightly. She touched his forehead and said, "You still have the same eyes." They sat together, eating with their hands on steel plates. No cameras, no interviews, just Uma and son. In that quiet moment, Sundar realized something. The world outside would always want more from him, more ideas, more speeches, more success. But this home was where his roots lived, and this woman who once gave up food so he could buy a notebook was the real architect of everything he had become. Years passed like pages of a thick book, each chapter filled with late nights, quiet ideas, and small victories. Sundar kept rising, not because he pushed others aside, but because he lifted others with him. In every meeting, in every product launch, his voice remained soft, but his vision grew louder. He became known as the calm mind behind great change. Chrome had become the world's most trusted browser. Android, which he also helped lead, became the heart of millions of phones. People now carried his work in their pockets, but Sundar never carried pride on his face. Every time he achieved something, he sent a message to Lakshmi. Sometimes it was just a few words: "Uma, we did it." Sometimes it was longer: "Uma, I wish you could see how people react when they hear my story." And Lakshmi always replied with the same: "I already see it. I see it in you." But life has its own way of testing even the strongest. In one boardroom in California, the discussion was tense. Google single quotes S founders, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, were stepping away from daily operations. The company needed a new CEO, a new face, a new voice. There were whispers: "He's too soft. He doesn't play politics. He's not loud enough." But someone stood up and said, "He listens more than anyone. And when he speaks, the room becomes clearer." A few weeks later, Sundar got the call. "We want you to be the CEO of Google." He didn't speak for a few seconds, not because he was shocked, but because he was thinking of his mother, the tin roof, the torn notebooks, the empty plates, the circuit board bought by selling a bangle. He said yes. Then he called Lakshmi. "Oma," he said quietly, "they chose me." "Of course," she replied. "I chose you first." The news spread across the world, from Chennai to Silicon Valley, from poverty to power. The rise of Sundar Pichai. Journalists knocked on their old door in Chennai. Lakshmi greeted them with tea and a soft smile. They asked, "How did you raise such a brilliant son?" She replied, "I didn't raise him to be brilliant. I raised him to be kind, to be strong, and to never forget who he is." And he never did. But with power came pressure. Every decision Sundar made now affected billions. Every mistake was public. When controversies hit Google, people looked at him. When countries asked hard questions about technology, data, and privacy, Sundar stood before them alone, sometimes tired, often, but never unsure. One day, he was called to testify before a panel of world leaders. Lakshmi watched the broadcast from a neighbor's TV. She saw her son in a suit, sitting straight, speaking with calm strength. When one leader accused Google of bias, Sundar replied gently, "We build our products for everyone. We are always learning, and we take your concerns seriously." He didn't shout, he didn't argue. He listened, then explained, and one by one, the room softened. Because truth doesn't need to shout. When the session ended, Lakshmi turned to her neighbor and said, "He still has the same eyes." But not everyone was kind. On social media, people made jokes. Some mocked his accent. Some questioned how a boy from a poor Indian family could now lead one of the world's biggest companies. Sundar saw those words, and for a brief moment, they hurt. But then he remembered something Lakshmi once said, "When people laugh at your roots, let your growth be the answer." He kept working, he kept growing, and quietly, he started programs to help others like him. Students from poor areas got scholarships, young inventors received grants. He once said in a speech, "I was lucky. Not everyone has a Lakshmi Pichai, so let us be that support for someone else." He didn't name buildings after himself. He didn't chase headlines. He chased impact. Back in Chennai, Lakshmi's health had begun to fade. Age had caught up with her, and her hands trembled a little more. But her eyes never stopped shining when she spoke about her son. Sundar visited her as often as he could. Each time, he sat on the same old mat, ate from the same steel plate, and asked the same question, "Amma, how are you?" And she always replied, "I'm better now, because you are who you said you'd become." Then one day, he brought her to America, her first plane ride, her first winter jacket, her first time seeing the place her son had built. When they walked into Google headquarters, the staff stood up and clapped. Lakshmi was confused. "Why are they clapping?" she asked. Sundar smiled. "Because you walked in." She looked around at the tall buildings, the shining glass, the screens with moving maps. "So many lights," she whispered. "And yet," Sundar said, "you are the brightest thing in this building." She laughed, not loudly, but in the way only mothers laugh when they know they've done something right. She spent a few weeks with him. They cooked together, watched movies. He showed her how to use a phone, but even in luxury, she missed her small house in Chennai. "I don't belong here," she said. "Amma, you belong anywhere I do." Sundar replied. She shook her head. "My work was never to live here. My work was to get you here." And just like that, she asked to return home. Sundar didn't argue, because he understood greatness doesn't need to be seen. It just needs to be felt. As she boarded the flight back, Sundar held her hand and said, "One day, Amma, I will build something that carries your name." She smiled. "You already did. Your name." The years rolled forward like a quiet river. Sundar continued leading Google, now also heading Alphabet, its parent company. With every new product, every innovation, his name reached farther. His speeches inspired students. His story gave hope to millions. Yet in his heart, one name remained louder than his own: Lakshmi Pichai. She had returned to Chennai, back to her small home. She still cleaned the floor every morning, still made tea in a steel pot, still watered the plants outside her door. When people came to meet her, she never changed her ways. "He is Sundar," she would say. "I am just his mother." But she was never just a mother. She was the reason Sundar had survived cold winters and silent rejections. She was the reason he had learned to speak with kindness, to lead without fear. She was the reason a boy with nothing had become a man trusted by the world. Then one day, the world grew quiet. Sundar was in a meeting when the call came. It was the neighbor from Chennai. "She fainted this morning," the voice said. "We took her to the hospital. The doctors are trying." Sundar's hands shook. The room blurred. He left everything. The conference, the meetings, the schedules. He booked the first flight to India on the plane. He didn't sleep. He looked out the window, the stars above, reminding him of all the nights he had studied beside a single candle, with Lakshmi sitting nearby, fanning away mosquitoes. He landed and rushed to the hospital. Lakshmi was conscious, but weak. When she saw him, she smiled. "You came," she whispered. "Always," he said, sitting beside her, holding her hand. "You remember what you told me when you left for Stanford?" she asked. "I said I'd make you proud. You did. More than I ever dreamed." Her fingers were cold, her voice softer than ever. "Sundar," she said slowly, "don't stop now. Don't lose your heart. Stay kind. Stay true." He nodded, tears running down his face. "Uma, rest now. I'm here." She looked at him one last time, and then, without a sound, she let go. The world outside kept moving. Cars drove past. Phones rang. Emails were sent. But Sundar's world stood still. They held a small funeral. No media. No cameras. Just family, neighbors, and the people she once helped quietly. Some came with flowers. Some came with stories. A woman said, "She paid for my daughter's school fees without telling anyone." A man said, "She brought food when I was sick and alone." A child said, "She once gave me her own slippers because mine were torn." And Sundar, standing in the center, realized something. His mother's legacy was not in the success she gave him. It was in the goodness she gave everyone. He returned to America with a heavy heart, and then he began something new. He started a foundation in her name, the Lakshmi Pichai Trust. Its mission, to help children from poor families chase big dreams. Just like he once did, the trust built schools, provided scholarships, gave internet access to rural areas, and every time a student walked into a classroom for the first time, Sundar saw a little version of himself, and a shadow of Lakshmi's smile. Years later, he was invited to give a global speech about leadership and technology. He stood on a stage before world leaders, scientists, and young dreamers. He didn't talk about profits, data, or strategy. He talked about a one-room house in Chennai, about a woman who sold her only bangle for a circuit board, about a mother who believed more in dreams than in sleep. He ended the speech with this: "You may know me as a CEO, but everything I am came from a woman who didn't let poverty define us." She didn't speak English. She never used a computer, but she gave me the strength to create the future. Her name was Lakshmi Pichai, and today she lives in every step I take. The room stood and clapped, not just for Sundar, but for every mother who had ever sacrificed in silence. He walked off the stage and looked up at the sky. "Uma, I kept my promise." And the wind, soft and warm, seemed to whisper back, "I knew you would." Years after Lakshmi Pichai's passing, Sundar often found himself thinking not about boardrooms or deadlines, but about the smell of tamarind rice in a small kitchen, the rusted fan spinning slowly above his head, and the soft sound of his mother's footsteps as she walked across the cement floor. He was now one of the most recognized names in technology. He had met world leaders, led billion-dollar projects, and spoken on stages that echoed across the planet. Yet none of those things filled him the way his mother's quiet belief once had. He often returned to Chennai, not in person, always but in memory. He would sit in his California home, holding the folded piece of her sari that she gave him the night before he left for America. It still smelled faintly of turmeric, still felt like home. One day, during a team event at Google, a young Indian intern nervously approached him. "Sir," the intern said, eyes wide, "my mother talks about your story all the time. She says you are proof that dreams don't need wealth, only belief." Sundar smiled. "Your mother is right," he said, "and belief is something no one can take away." The intern hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever miss her?" Sundar didn't speak right away. Then he said softly, "Every day." But grief had changed in him. It was no longer a weight that pulled him down. It had become a light that guided him forward. He remembered how Lakshmi once told him, "If you can rise without hurting others, you are not just successful, you are human." He carried that with him in every decision. When he chose leaders for teams, he looked for humility. When he gave talks, he shared failures as openly as successes. He built company culture on trust, not fear, and quietly, behind the scenes, he continued, supporting education programs through the Lakshmi Pichai Trust. 1 year, a village school in Tamil Nadu received computers for the first time. A teacher cried as she watched students use them. "This is not just a machine," she said. "This is a doorway." A doorway Sundar opened. The trust also launched a scholarship named Ema's Dream. It was for girls from poor families who wanted to study science or technology but had no support. One girl, Kavya, walked 10 kilometers every day to school. She applied for the scholarship, not expecting anything. She received it. When she found out, she told her mother, "I will make Sundar sir proud, just like he made his Amma proud." The ripples continued. In one village, a mother named Kalpana taught herself to read because she wanted to understand her daughter's books. "If Lakshmi Pichai could raise a CEO," she said, "I can raise a teacher." Sundar began receiving letters, not about business, but about mothers, letters written in shaky hands, folded carefully, some even written in regional languages. They all had the same message: "Thank you for reminding us that we matter." One evening, Sundar sat by his window watching the sunset. His daughter sat beside him, flipping through an old photo album. She stopped at a faded picture. "Who is this?" she asked. "That's your grandmother," he said. "She looks strong. She was the strongest person I ever knew. Tell me about her." So he did. He told his daughter how Lakshmi Pichai walked miles to find cheap rice, how she gave away her last gold bangle for a circuit board, how she stitched notebooks from calendar pages, how she once fed neighbors who mocked her, how she never asked for anything, but gave everything. His daughter listened with wide eyes. "I want to be like her," she whispered. "You already are," he said. And in that moment, he knew Lakshmi's legacy was safe. Not just in Google's history, not just in news articles or speeches, but in hearts, in families, in futures she never saw but shaped. Sundar later visited his childhood home. The tin roof had been repaired, the walls painted, but the soul remained. He walked through the door, touching the walls, breathing in memories. He found her old steel plate, the same one they had shared rice on during stormy nights. He sat down on the floor, cross-legged, just like before, and he closed his eyes. For a moment, he felt her beside him, not as a memory, but as strength, as love, as light.